And we welcome you into another edition of our program, Moral Side of the News. Thanks for spending some time with us this weekend. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade-For-Children. We have a panel assembled, we have topics, so let's get started. On this program, protesters disrupt the Jefferson County Public School Board meeting. Some are calling for resource officers to be taken out of schools after a violent altercation between officers and a student. Plus, the Speaker of the Kentucky House of Representatives resigns in the wake of an alleged sexual harassment case. Those topics are on our docket this week. We'll discuss those with our distinguished panel here on Moral Side of the News. With us this week, Reverend Conrad Moore, retired from Northside Church of Christ. Reverend Daniel Corey Schul, Burnett Avenue Baptist Church. Father Joe Graffis, Archdiocese of Louisville. Reverend Dr. Charles Burton, 2nd Baptist Taylorsville. And Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Temple Shalom. Up first on this edition of our program, shouts and protests interrupted a Jefferson County School Board meeting. As WHS 11's Holden Kurwicki reports, the protest came in response to a violent altercation between resource officers and a student at Jeffersontown High School.
And we don't want our schools to be prisons, and that's what they are.
After an incident at Jeffersontown High School, some parents and teachers are divided on school resource officers in JCPS schools.
I do not feel safe, and having an SRO or having extra police makes me feel safe.
In the last calendar year, there have been 840 assaults in JCPS schools, including 27 at Jeffersontown High School alone, which works out to roughly 1 per week. Former LMPD officer and Secret Service agent Greg Gitcher says those numbers speak to the need of SROs in some schools.
You know, some teachers, you hear them talk, that they're scared. They're scared that in the old days when, you know, they told a student to sit down, we sat down, right, you and I. But nowadays they get a lot of lip and they get a lot of back talk, and that maybe they're a little concerned about walking out into the parking lot.
But what he says the numbers can't show is if that officer is fit to be an SRO.
You know, dealing with somebody on the street and then dealing with a high school student is more of a challenge.
While the state of Kentucky and the National School Resource Officer Association offer training, Gitcher says it could always be taken a step further.
The whole idea of a school resource officer now is, you know, crime prevention and, you know, and assist with security matters, right? But the police officers, some of them aren't trained to deal with young people.
After recent events at JTown, he says he's fielded many questions about who was right and who was wrong.
If that student would punch a uniformed police officer, what would he do to a teacher?
So, should SROs be in schools? He says he can only answer on a case-by-case basis.
Nobody wants a cop around till you need one, and who's the first one to call 911, right?
WHS 11's Holden Kurwicki reporting. We turn to our panel on Moral Side of the News. And panel, your thoughts on officers in schools. Should we have them? Shouldn't we? Your thoughts as we go forward.
Well, I thought the officer made it some very good points there. That you know, we need to have trained security people in schools. Unfortunately, do we need them in all schools? I don't know, but certainly at some schools and probably in every school at some point. But there needs to be special training for that, and because it's a different situation than street. Of course, the police officers get an enormous amount of training, but they could always use more, and how to lessen a situation. But I think we're in an age where there's, particularly with police officers, and many of my African-American brothers here can speak to it, that I think the emotions are very high on both sides of that issue, and how can we lessen some of that emotion so it's the good for all parties involved. So yes, I think we should have them. I think they need to be specially trained to be able to do that.
And I think it needs to also be a level playing field. To wit, if there are going to be police officers or school resource officers, if it's in school A, then it's in school B, C, and D. If it's in one high school, it's in every high school. It just, those tapes just amazed me. That was violence, that's frightening. And I'm thinking, if those resource officers weren't there at all, then what would have happened?
Right.
I have been in, now that I work with law enforcement regularly, I have been in schools with those officers. I've seen, thankfully, not an incident exactly like that, but I've talked with them and I've heard them talk about the level of disrespect that a lot of the kids show the teachers and all adults and the things that they just say to them to their face, which is appalling. In this case, it appears from what I've read that they had basically taken a boy into custody for fighting, which is a normal thing, and his brother sucker punched the police officer and slammed him against the wall. We can train all we want to, but by law, that police officer now has to deal with that, and if he sucker punched him, slammed him against the wall, it's going to be down in the floor because he has no choice. But resource officers are in the schools also because the schools want them there. And it's a double-edged sword. I agree, and the ones that I know are the types of officers that would bend over backwards to make, you know what I mean, situations good and as best they can. I don't know these guys here, I don't know, but from what I hear and see, I think that what took place there is within the realm of what was proper under those circumstances, from what I can tell, being limited in what I've read. But the problem is, in general, I've been in schools and been appalled at what I hear students saying, and nothing can be done about it. You know, I mean the cursing and what I think is just out of control behavior. Now, I blame a lot of things for that. I blame the breakdown of the home and the parents not being there to do some things. I think we as a society have allowed some things to take place where there's not you can't discipline them. You can't, and I don't mean whipping them or something. You know, every time you say discipline, people think you mean some corporal punishment. But if you've ever walked in those hallways and you've ever been there with him, probably 98, 99% of the kids are great kids. They love the resource officer, walk up to him, whatever. And yet, as you and I both know, it doesn't take sometimes one or two things, and then the kids they'll follow along, they'll incite things just because of what's happened. That's part of being a child. And I think the officers understand that. But here, when you are attacked trying to take this child out, what are you going to do? You've got to, by law, you've got to bring him under control. And if you have never seen, you know, I've been in a lot of different sections, and I've seen things happen. And if you've never been around that, you think, well, wow, that's so violent. But if you have been around it and you've seen the actions of people, you begin to realize it's not quite what it appears to be, if that makes sense.
I think there is clearly a deficiency in the way that law enforcement is being trained currently. To talk about disrespect on behalf of the students, the students are not professional. Professionals should be able to handle themselves and those type of situations in a way that does not resemble something that happens on a street corner somewhere.
And I agree, but
worse.
I'm not saying that they don't respond to their disrespect disrespectfully.
But that was your argument, that because of what they say.
No. My argument is they are troubled by, and they see disrespectfulness in general, and that's, as a person, disturbing them, just like it would be, I hope, me or you, if we were standing in a hallway and we see that.
The problem is, if you cuss me out, I am not a trained law enforcement personnel that is trained and paid to de-escalate those type of situations. And I guess what is frustrating to me, and what's deeply concerning, is we see these type of instances happening not only in our communities, but in our schools, which say to me that clearly there is some type of training that is not taking place, and it's overwhelmingly happening to African American and Hispanic men. And there seems to me to be fear on the part of the law enforcement personnel and a lack of training for people, not only resource officers in school, but also officers in our communities. And I think that's a public safety issue.
But I think you're misguided to some degree on that. And the reason I say that is this. These guys, if someone's speaking to them, hang on, if someone speaks to them abusively, they're not physically attacking them because they do try to diffuse things.
Speaking to them abusively is not the issue. You can control what people say when you are paid and trained supposedly to keep the peace. You are a keeper of the peace. You are employed.
But you're misunderstanding the whole concept. You're taking what I'm saying as they are taking some hostile action, and that is not true.
I'm saying somebody has to be the professional.
And they are.
And we ought not expect community
and they
people
are professional.
or students to be professional.
They are professional.
They are not.
Have you been in the schools?
I have been. I'm
and
sure.
You walked the halls with have you encountered those kind of things?
I'm in our schools every week.
But have you encountered those situations?
I have encountered those kind of situations.
And so how did you handle them?
I don't think that the law enforcement personnel should be let off the hook.
They're not being let
for what they are paid and what they are supposedly to be trained for.
They are trained for.
If our law enforcement personnel cannot respond.
No, I said they are trained.
If they cannot, well, they're not governing themselves like it. If they can respond in a more suitable manner than that, they need to be retrained.
Let's take another place. Let's take another place.
Go ahead.
What about this? I was going to ask him about what kind of training would you think would be helpful?
I don't know. I'm not in that type of in that type of important situation. But I do know this: if we have episode after episode after episode across the nation, where people who are paid to preserve the safety of our communities, and they are disproportionately mistreating or handling these type of situations inappropriate. It's not just Louisville; it's everywhere. We have a larger issue with the training.
Let's go back to this.
Of law enforcement
The teachers
officials.
and the principals, the professionals, they're paid. Why don't they handle it and not ask police to handle it?
You need police in the schools, not only for the students. You need police in school in case something happens where there's a safety emergency.
But why not let them sit out in the parking lot unless something happens? I mean,
okay, so I have a question, follow-up question. Where does the buck stop on this? The principal of JTown High School stepped aside, reports say. Yes. Is that appropriate, and is that where the buck stops, or your thoughts on that?
I don't know the circumstances about that. Of course, the present interim superintendent used to be at this school, so whether it was not handled correctly, you know, I don't know. I have enough information to know where it was. Evidently, he felt like I didn't handle this situation in the best way for whatever it was. And therefore he resigned. So it'll be interesting.
I'm curious as to why. I don't know the background of why he made
so
that.
quickly.
Why he made that decision. I wouldn't think it would be the principal's fault, but apparently there's something that we don't know, which would have led him to make that decision.
I mean, there's just so much we don't know about. Not about the climate. I think we understand the climate, but the incident in general, we're looking at a recording of the incident.
Right. That doesn't show the whole story.
Right. I mean, it's
a clip.
The problem for me is the climate, because the climate is that when over and over again, we see these type of instances occurring in our schools, in our communities, and it seems that people who are trained, are professionals in this line of work, some kind of way with these type of instances, they can't control it, it gets out of hand. But then, you know, a shooter can go into Mother Emanuel and shoot 9 people. And some kind of way, this person who has all type of mental issues and all type of instabilities, they're taken out of life, and the situation is handled with so much more finesse. I am baffled by the inequities of the way these situations are handled.
With all due respect, though, the problem is that, first of all, probably 99% of the time, you don't have any issues. And even when you have disrespectful students or whatever, it's dealt with in a very professional way. We're talking about a situation where there's a fight that occurred, and you had people that are incited by that, good, bad, or indifferent, and then you have a brother, evidently things were going pretty well until he attacked the police officer, and the police officer had to deal with his ensuing
From what I
attack.
saw in that video, there was more than one police officer.
Yeah, there were
There
backup
two
was
that
called.
arrived.
So
Backup was
I'm just
called.
curious as
Well,
to
you've
the
never
way.
been in those situations, because I'm telling you, I have seen those. I have been personally in those situations where it took 2 or 3 people to control someone because of their adrenaline, trying not to hurt them. And it's easy to sit back here and say that, but I'm telling you, when you have been there and in the middle of it, it's not that easy.
So the acting superintendent said clearly what we saw in video did not indicate a healthy and safe academic climate, and that's concerning to me. Marty Polio said, Charles, we haven't heard from you. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this topic.
I look at it in terms of, I'm baffled between, I'm stuck between 2 things. I agree with Corey that there needs to be some treatment, some training to address when you're talking about dealing with children.
Sure.
But the other side of the coin, though, of that, is that if they did not intervene, or the flip side of it is 3 officers jumped on 1 child, we'd be having another different conversation. What's the safety issue? Do you stop it? Do we let the children assault the police officer and let him just stand there and say, well, okay, do what you want to me? No, you can't do that. But I don't think the video gives the entire picture.
It doesn't. I agree.
So it's difficult. So it's somewhere it is difficult to respond. I've questioned and looked at what is missing in this scene. The whole story. We don't know the beginning, the end, or how they got to that point, or what brought that.
One of the go ahead,
children, children sometimes. It's what I call the mob mentality.
Right.
You're talking about what happens in the school. There's no difference between what happens on the street in the mob mentality and what happens in the school.
I agree.
But to expect a child to be, quote unquote, professional, children don't think professional.
You know, here's another question. Where was the male teachers that were standing there? Why weren't they helping
They don't
the police
get paid
officer?
to break up fights.
Oh, okay, so it's all about the paycheck.
Well,
The
It's not
resource
about the
officers
paycheck.
are
Okay, it's not
employed to de-escalate
and when they
those
take
type of
action,
situations.
then it's their fault.
They ought to take action in a way that does not
But you haven't told me how. You said you don't know.
I am not a professional
Well,
law
then how
enforcement
can you
official.
sit here and not realize that maybe they are trained those ways and it hasn't worked and
What
you
I'm
don't know
saying
it?
is if that is representative, if what we saw in the video is representative of the way that they are being trained, we need, our society at large, needs new, visionary law enforcement personnel who can think of more creative ways to deal with community persons and school
And
students.
I assure you that happens all the time.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Go ahead.
Could I, one last point, I
Yep.
guess.
Yep.
Part of this issue was that they were saying we should get such officers out of the schools. Right. And
say
I don't know
take them
whether we
out.
could agree on this.
Take
I
them
mean,
out.
I think that would be the worst thing, not having professionally trained people there. Now, should they be online officers, as they were JTown officers, or specially trained officers? I don't want to get into that, but I think, like in any of these things, we could always do things better. I guess trying to, whoever looks at this and sees a full tape about what happened, but down the line,
You
I think,
also
how
have-
do we prevent this in
You
the
ought to
future?
we haven't even talked about this. We have to, you know, what are the school's expectations of that officer?
Well, that's true,
We've
too.
only talked about one side of it.
Right.
And so that's another issue too. What are they expecting that officer to do? And whether or not those officers were out of line with that expectation.
But also, I think you open the door to something. Also, if you talk about the expectations of the police officer, the school must make that. If they want officers, well, you're right. What are their expectations? But I think at that particular point, it becomes behooves the school system to put money in it to themselves to address it.
But there's a
To
legal
Corey's
issue.
point, to court, legal issue is what?
Well, legally, when that young man attacked that police officer, it's illegal to assault a police officer.
It's illegal to assault me too.
But that's not what happens, what I'm trying to say. The assault on another person that happened earlier, he was arresting that person. Now his brother assaults a police officer. You want the police officer to just stand there and be assaulted and say, God bless you, everyth's fine?
I said that earlier.
All right.
I said that.
Well,
All right.
okay.
We're going to move on this
I
program.
have a feeling
moral
this issue
side
will
of the
go on.
news.
No, it will.
It'll come back again, I'm sure. Our second topic this week, Kentucky House Speaker Jeff Hoover stepped down. from his role following claims of a sexual harassment settlement. As WHS 11's Chris Williams reports, Kentucky lawmakers are calling the sexual harassment scandal a distraction as the caucus moves forward with pension reform.
Some have told me they expect discussions today to include leadership as they move forward following the weekend resignation of Speaker Jeff Hoover, who stepped down from his leadership role following allegations of sexual harassment. Hoover continues to serve his district as representative. An email from Speaker Pro Tem David Osborne reports the caucus hired Louisville law firm Middleton Rutlinger to handle the investigation into the harassment scandal. He went on to call the scandal a distraction and said he'd met with Senate President Stivers vowing to move forward with pension reform. That letter was followed by one from House Democrats who argued against the Republicans hiring an outside firm, instead demanding the Independent Legislative Research Commission, or LRC, guide the way.
That was WHS 11's Chris Williams reporting. So our panel on Moral Side of the News, sexual harassment front and center across the nation these days. Should Representative Hoover also be forced to resign from the legislature and not just his position as Speaker of the House? Your thoughts?
What are the rules set in place for situations of this type? There must be precedent.
Yeah, Speaker Pro Tem David Osborne said they will follow all constitutional legal guidelines as they move forward.
What's that mean, though?
I respect the fact that he stepped down from that. I do think that's honorable. But also, what happened to innocent until proven guilty? And my point is, I don't know if the man's guilty of that or not. So to take away his job, so to speak, on that premise, I don't think any of us would support, because, you know, we may be taking an innocent man's.
Didn't he admit to it? And
well, I don't know.
He denied sexually harassing the staff member, but said he sent inappropriate text messages, but they were consensual.
Well, then it still gets back in, you got to prove something.
What does that mean? I mean,
it means that it was okay at the point, now she says it's not.
So let's back up. The governor suggested everyone who has any harassment settlement should resign immediately. Representative Hoover took the advice. Your thoughts on the governor kind of calling the shot a day before Hoover resigns?
Well, from what I gather, that there's been some rather contentious blood between the governor and Mr. Hoover. So, I mean, who knows?
Well, I mean, I think there's several issues here.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think there is some serious issues before the state legislature, and this is a distraction from it, and perhaps it was politically responsible for him to step down as the speaker, because that really gets in the midst of all of it. I mean, it's up to the people in his district, and I guess whatever kind of trial that the legislature would have about proving this is would be his, whether he stays on as a state legislature. But I think all of this gets into politics, like now, and I do think this is a serious issue that we're starting to see a lot more seriously in our country, and I think we need to be speaking about our children with this, how we treat all men and women. I think that we've had a long history of not treating people with respect for who they are, and unfortunately, sometimes the people in positions of power misuse that power over other people.
We're talking about government here, and it's not just on the state level, it's on the local level, and it's on the national level.
Sure. Right.
We elect people to govern us, to make the government work. And these tawdry sideshows don't do anything for that. And
they stop the whole process of legislating and governing.
It's not one party, it's not the other party, it's government in general, and just...
And caught in the middle of all this is the pension reform bill, which the governor would like to call a special session before the end of the year. Is that even remotely possible?
Is a good thing. Maybe it gives them more time to think through this.
Put it off the docket for a while.
But somebody needs the money.
Yeah.
Sounds like I'm hearing politics
well, we hope
involved somewhere
there's some
along the
money
line.
to give.
What do you mean when you say it's a good thing? You mean to push it?
Well, I'm saying that maybe it will allow some of the legislators and the powers that be to think more deeply about the bill that has been put forth, and will it benefit the citizens
rather
of the
than
state?
rush it?
Right.
Because Public Pension Oversight Board Representative Brian Linder says, I don't think the votes are there for this bill anyway. So is this a political effort to push it down the road to next year? We only have 6 weeks left in the year.
Right, and you're not going to have them during Christmas be there too. So.
This just puzzles me. What would happen if they didn't have a majority? If one party or another didn't have a majority, then we'd really be in trouble, huh?
Well, I think both the national government and the local governments are all in trouble right now because we can't seem to get anything done because of all these distractions.
You know, all of this, and even the first topic and even into this gets to be, and I was doing some study and research this morning on how to deal with conflict and how, you know, just some things. And we have lost the art of conversation in this society. And we have lost the art of being able to handle difficulties in the appropriate way.
And negotiate
and
respectfully.
negotiate respectively and find the higher ground, whatever that might be or whatever. And I think when it comes to some of these things we're talking about, if we would learn that art again, then we might solve some of those issues a little easier with our government and things of that nature. There's a lot of diversion that takes place, and maybe this situation with him is a little bit of a political diversion, which shouldn't be, but you know.
So how in the future do we find candidates who don't have these issues going forward? It seems to be a challenge everywhere, not just here in our backyard.
Well, you know, the old saying is, if you want to find out your ancestry, run for office. So I don't know that you can do that because, well, usually after you get in, then they find out all the dirt. You know what I mean? And
well, I think if you look at anybody's life, there's a horse thief somewhere in the family.
Well, and I think while the issue is a very critical issue, I think also it's an easy issue to misuse on both sides.
Absolutely.
You know, people can be accused of things and be guilty without
trial by media.
And so and because it's so emotional on both sides, this really gets to be really a challenge to say how do we find out the healthy way to deal with all of this.
I think the healthy way, and I don't know. Once again, I'm just pontificating. I don't know how it's going to happen. People need to talk with one another and not at each other. But I don't know how to make that
Emotions
start.
control much of what we do, and that gets us in trouble.
So we're getting close to the end of 2017. Just reflecting, this has been quite a year, has it not?
Yes, it is. A sad year.
That's an understatement. Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have more time to talk about it in future programs. At this time, this wraps up this edition of our program, Moral Side of the News. We thank you for joining, watching, and listening. And I'd like to thank Conrad Moore, Corey Schul, Joe Graffis, Charles Burton, and Stan Miles for joining us on this edition of our program. And a reminder, you can watch this program again anytime at WHAS11.com. And in the meantime, too, please take time out to learn more about the WHAS Crusade-For-Children at our all-new website, WHAScrusade.org. Thanks for watching, listening, and we'll see you next time. Go out and make it a great day.